evening, everyone. We will be starting momentarily. We're going to wait for folks to file on in from the waiting room. And as we do that, for those that are with us already, no obligation, but for those that are comfortable doing so, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from tonight. So let us know what city or town you are watching us from. And we will be starting in about 15 to 30 seconds. But if you're comfortable doing so, sort of as an icebreaker, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. Haverhill, Newton, Haverhill. I better see a Tewksbury. Okay. Billerica, Vienna, Virginia. Wonderful. Phoenix, Arizona, formerly of Tewksbury, that counts, that's good enough for me. Seattle, Washington, Chelmsford, Andover, Tewksbury, Rockport, Tewksbury, Chelmsford, Vermont, Montreal, Quebec, oh, California, wonderful, excellent. We'll keep them coming. Out of respect for those that came on time, we will get moving here. Okay, so good evening, and thanks for being with us for the next hour or so. Author Jennifer Dupee will discuss her latest book, The Little French Bridal Shop, in conversation with author Maya Shanbang Lang in this Zoom webinar. I'm probably going to mispronounce half these words, and I apologize in advance. I think I got most of that right there. So my name is Robert Hayes. I'm the Community Outreach Librarian and Head of Technical Services at the Tewksbury Public Library. Before I disappear for the night, I wanted to make 4 quick points. First, I'd like to thank everyone behind the scenes for making this event possible. This is a collaboration between several north of Boston libraries, including Andover, North Andover, Chelmsford, Tewksbury, and Wilmington. And I also want to give a great big thank you to Wellesley Books for being our bookstore partner, and also Megan Beatty from MB Communications. Second, just know that this event is currently being live streamed on the Tewksbury Public Library's Facebook page. Please go over to our Facebook page and give it a like, and feel free to share it on your own page. Third, you'll all be, for those joining live on Zoom, you'll be receiving a feedback survey from me via email tomorrow morning. Please let us know what you thought of tonight's event and what you'd like to see for future events. Also, in the feedback survey will be a link to purchase an autographed copy of Jennifer's book, The Little French Bridal Shop, from Wellesley Books. And 10% of each sale will benefit all of the participating libraries tonight. And then finally, to set expectations, I anticipate this event will last approximately an hour. Jennifer and Maya will have a discussion where Maya will essentially interview Jennifer for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Audience members should type their questions into the Q&A. So if you have a question, you want to type that into the Q&A. And if you have any comments, you can type those into the comment box. But Maya will be keeping an eye on the Q&A box, and we'll get to some audience questions around 7:40, 7:45. All right, so let me introduce Maya, and then I'll introduce Jennifer. Maya Shanbang Lang is the author of What We Carry, named a New York Times Editor's Choice, an Amazon Best Memoir of 2020, and a must-read memoir by Bustle, Book Riot, Good Morning America, Parade, Times of India, and others. She is also the author of The 16th of June, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and a finalist for the Audie Awards for Best Audiobook of the Year. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Goop, InStyle, and others. She's the winner of the Neil Shepard Prize in Fiction, and she holds a PhD in comparative literature. And let's see, and then certainly last but not least, let me introduce Jennifer. Jennifer Dupee is the eldest of a set of fraternal triplets. Wow. And she grew up seeking any quiet corner of the house so that she could read, write, and work on puzzles. Her lifelong passion for old houses inspired Elmhurst, the grand home featured in her debut novel, The Little French Bridal Shop, which St. Martin's Press just published this month. She's a keen observer of human life and writes in an these are small words, yet big words for me. She writes in a prosaic style infused with an impish sense of humor and tender moments. Her goal with her writing is to make you laugh, cry, and think a little more deeply about the world and the people around you. Jennifer is a graduate of Brown University, where she received her honors in creative writing. She is an active member of the Grub Street writing community in Boston and is published in the feminist press. She was a semifinalist for the 2016 James Jones first novel competition and also a semifinalist for this 2016 Faulkner Wisdom competition. Jennifer lives in a historic house just outside of Boston with her family, and she's currently at work on her next 2 novels. Whew, all right, so let's all give a big virtual round of applause to Maya and Jennifer. And ladies, you can take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to all of the libraries that are hosting this event. We love libraries. And also thank you to those of you who are joining us from so many different places. It's lovely to have you here. Jen, congrats on the launch of your debut novel, which is such a big moment. The Little French Bridal Shop is charming and gave me so much to think about. And I'm excited to talk with you more about it. It launched just 10 days ago, so this is so exciting. And I was hoping that you could tell the audience a little bit about it and maybe even read from it, just so that people can get a taste of your writing and your voice.
Absolutely. First, let me get a few of my thank yous out of the way as well. I want to thank Robert Hayes for organizing the event, and thank you to Tewksbury Library and the affiliates for joining, and for all of you viewers out there for joining us tonight. And lastly, a huge thanks to Maya Shangbag Lang. Her memoir, What We Carry, is lovely. I know you all just met me, but you can trust me that you should seek. I urge you to seek this book. It's restorative, it's articulate, it's poignant, and I think you'll all just love it. So that said, let me tell you, excuse me, a little bit about the Little French Bridal Shop. The story is set in motion when Larissa Pearl returns to her small seaside hometown upon the death of her great aunt Ursula. She's a bit of an emotional mess. She's just lost her job, she's broken up with her boyfriend, and she's struggling to cope with her mother's failing health. And on a whim, she wanders to this little main street in this seaside town where she lives, and she wanders into a bridal shop and purchases a dress, although she has no groom. It's a small town. Soon word spreads all over town that she's getting married, and rather do anything to dispel the rumor, she instead perpetuates it, and small town chaos ensues. And yeah, I would love to take a moment and read just a little bit. Let me slip on my glasses here. So this is the moment. So she's just gotten back to the house, as I said, inherited by great aunt Ursula, and she's kind of perusing the place. She left the photos behind and headed down the stairs to the dining room. She smiled, as she always did, at the wallpaper, a heavy navy blue imprinted with a repeating pattern of tan and white pheasants glancing over their shoulders, apprehensive. The pheasants looked so silly, startled out of their forward momentum, that she couldn't help but laugh. But her smile shrunk when she turned the corner and spotted a large strip of the paper peeling away from the wall above the fireplace, dangling like the tongue on a cartoon dog. Crap, she whispered to herself. If her mother had been more with it, it was the sort of project they might have tackled together, a mother-daughter do-it-yourself special, fixing up the house and taking occupancy. But no, it was too big to manage. Best to just make the repairs and sell the place. So, after balancing on a chair and trying, to no avail, to press the paper back into place, she gathered her things, headed outside, and tramped back down the hill towards Duffy's Hardware, where she hoped to find some wallpaper glue. She'd almost made it there when, partway through Main Street, her gaze alighted once again on the mannequin in the window of the bridal shop. She stopped and peered in. The model's hand, she noticed now, had been painted with a pale pink French manicure, and she had a faux diamond adorning her delicately raised ring finger. Larissa snickered, yet something took hold of her, a mischievous and imposturous side of herself that had recently been surfacing to her surprise and delight. Wouldn't it be fun, just for a laugh, she thought, to take a peek at those dresses, to pretend for a moment that she was that mannequin, or even her own mother, pre-illness, skipping down the steps of the church? How did one feel, she wondered, wearing such a dress? She suspected she'd feel ridiculous, pompous and overplumed like a peacock. But no one would have to know she wasn't serious. Would she dare? She sucked in a breath and smiled to herself. Yes, she would. And so that, that sets the story in motion. She wanders into the shop. She buys a dress. And, I might mention here that the novel has a bit of a self-mocking tone, and I feel like it's helpful to kind of almost buy into this tone as you're reading it, because Larissa acts impulsively, she makes poor decisions, and I think at moments readers will almost get a little bit frustrated with her, but stick with it because I think by the end you'll come around. And if you hear this sort of tone, it's helpful in reading the novel. But with that, Maya, let me turn it back to you.
Well, one of my first questions to you was going to be, you've set me up so nicely, because one of my first questions to you was going to be about Larissa as a refreshingly complex and nuanced character. So I, while reading this, found her humor and her wry narrative voice so appealing because it was very authentic, I thought, and very real and not remotely fake or superficial. She taps into these thoughts that we have as we walk by, a bridal shop, for example. Before we get more into her, one thing I always am fascinated to hear when I'm talking to debut novelists is, first of all, like, what led you to write this novel? And how long was it sitting with you in your life or in your head or in a desk drawer? And yeah, how did it, what was its path to today and to being in the world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm a really imagistic writer, and I love description, and I very often start with setting. And so I grew up, and my grandmother lived for many years on the North Shore of Boston. So I know many of our viewers are from the Boston area, but just to give it kind of some placement, she lived for many years in the tiny seaside community of Beverly Farms, which is right next door to Manchester by the Sea, of the same town of movie fame. And they're both sort of charming seaside towns. And so it was a place that was, deep in my psyche as I kind of embarked on the opening pages of this book. And so I naturally drew on it as I was creating my fictional town that was based really quite loosely, honestly, on Beverly Farms. And I've always had a fascination with old houses. So I started this book, well, I realized when my husband and I started dating, which is around the time I started this book, he had a fascination for old houses as well. And we often took walks down nearby Elmhurst Road so we could admire a historic house there. And, we kind of imagined ourselves buying the house. And actually, so not long after we started admiring, we got married and moved into a condo. But then we were house searching, and this house went on the market, and we were like, oh my God, and I had started the opening pages of my book, and I knew there was a house in the book, and I named the house Elmhurst in tribute to this house on the Elmhurst Road. So the house goes on the market, and I'm thinking, I mean, the narrative is we're going to end up with the house, right? Like this is the way it should end, if when we're writing the book. So we bid on it, and I think we came in second, which means you don't get the house. So we didn't get the house. Um, but at the same time, I was developing I had treated myself to a writing weekend in Rockport, Massachusetts, and another seaside community. And I had just settled into some meaningful writing. And I noticed this. I was distracted by this very large pattern wallpaper on the wall of pheasants. You notice in the excerpt I just read, there were pheasants. And I couldn't stop laughing when I looked at these pheasants because they had sort of this like startled, like, "Ugh," expression. And because I couldn't stop looking, I began to write the pheasants into the wallpaper. And so then months later, and I am going to get back to sort of more of your question on gestation and timing because I think it's a really interesting one. But I wanted to mention that I then went to kind of revise that scene later and realized I hadn't taken a picture of the wallpaper. And writers being the obsessive creatures that we are, we need to have these things, these almost sort of talismans talismans of what we're writing about. So I first did a search of the Emerson Inn where I had been writing from, and the wallpaper and the name of their dining room, and I came up with all these wedding photos. And so I had all these wedding photos with the wallpaper in the background, but it was kind of out of focus because the photos were focused on the wedding celebrants and not the wallpaper. Surprise, surprise. And so I called up the inn and I said, can you just snap a photo of that wallpaper for me? And they said, well, the room is being renovated and we've torn the wallpaper down, horrors, right? But we have rolls of it in our back room, and if you would like to come and get some of the wallpaper, you may. And so, I was in my car, I was at work actually, but it was out the back door, faster than I could, think. And I ended up getting a picture of the pheasant wallpaper, which stayed in my office, for the entire writing of the book, and I had it there as my reference. Um, but to answer your question more specifically, I really love to let a novel gestate. So I feel like it gestated for 6 to 8 months before I really dug in. And while that gestation is happening for me, I often write in longhand, so I will jot down images, I'll jot down sentences. I'm always sort of forming the actual lexicon, but also like the visual lexicon of the work, if you know what I mean. Um, and then it will start to sort of take shape for me, and only once sort of I have a grip on, okay, here's where I'm going, do I begin to kind of really put it to the page and maybe on the computer. Um, and I'd say from start to finish, this one took about 4.5 to 5 years, roughly. Yeah.
Well, so because I imagine, and first of all, I was absolutely going to ask you about the pheasant wallpaper. And I had seen in your acknowledgement section that you talk about getting a piece of it. So I was so hoping that you had it for us. So
I
thank
have
you
it.
for sharing it. I imagine that we have aspiring writers in the audience. So I'm curious, during that process, when you actually started to put words to paper and decided, okay, I'm going to try and sort of capture this thing that's been gestating. What was that like for you? Did you have moments of self-doubt, struggle? Because with the first novel, you don't know that it's going to get published.
Right.
So it's a big, sort of leap of faith. Um, so what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so this was not the first novel I had written. So I had started my first novel when I was 19. I was in my second semester in college, freshman year of college. I had gotten into an advanced fiction writing class, and I wrote this little, it must have been 10 pages, a short story. I thought it worked really well on its own. I was proud of it. I kind of, presented it in my critique. And the teacher, who was this wonderful Greek graduate student who ran her name was Eurydice Convaselli. She was very kind of voluptuous and Greek, and I mean that in the best way possible. Um, she just sort of said, and the class said, "Oh, you just need to write a novel." And of course, I'd been a reader and a writer all of my life, but taking that leap, as you were kind of alluding to earlier, it's really different to kind of think about reading a novel and loving a novel and then translating that to writing a novel. So I spent the rest of my college years and a year after that trying to figure out how to turn this little short story into a novel. And I wandered a lot, and I had doubts for sure because I didn't have a strong sense of where I was going. I think I had, a bit of a talent for description and sort of a natural storytelling voice, but that's really different than honing your craft and kind of knowing how to piece together the arc of a story so that it holds together and so that it can have both kind of good character development and also good plot and pacing. So I finished it, I think, a year or so after I graduated from college, and I went directly to editors to try to sell it, which is not really the thing to do. The thing to do is go to agents. So the goal is really to find the right agent who loves your novel and may help you rework it a bit, and then that agent can find the editor who is the right match for your novel. There's a lot in this business about finding the right match. And in that scenario, in that first novel, I didn't end up finding the match, and it was a transitional time in my life. There was a lot going on, graduating from college. My mother was ill, and so I wrote another one quite quickly. I didn't do much with it, and then I wrote another one, and that last one was the one that got the attention of my current agent, and then he said, "Well, I'm going to pass on this one, but what else are you working on?" So all of that was really just a long-winded way of saying, by the time I got to this novel, I felt like I had a much stronger handle on what to do. And though it's my debut, I had put so much time in kind of perfecting my craft and learning my craft that there was something about this novel that meshed for me from the very beginning. It was very often I'd be sort of out at my day job or out at the grocery store, and I'd think, oh, I need to put that in. Oh, this would be kind of the perfect coincidence. Oh, and you'll see in the novel there are lots of repeating phrases, and they take on sort of different meanings and different contexts depending on what the situation is. And many of those were coming to me, and as I said, like in that gestational phase, I would sort of jot them down and get them going. So, overall, it was an interesting overall journey to this novel, but um, I felt pretty good about it as I was writing it.
Um, I'm so glad you shared all of that because often I think um, people don't know about all these behind the scenes,
Totally.
the long, long road that leads to a finished book. It always reminds me of movies when they do that quick montage of all of the training for an athlete, right? Like a boxer, you have like
Exactly.
30 seconds of montage. And it's because that hard work, if it wasn't shown in montage, it's arduous and it's hard to show up every day and to commit. So it's great to hear about that. You mentioned this idea of finding the right match between author and agent, and so much of your book is about finding the right match, um, not just with someone else, but sort of in life, finding the right place for yourself and being in a space of authenticity. So to get back to Larissa, who is such a complex character, what's fascinating about her is that, as you mentioned in the passage that you read, when we meet her at the opening of the novel, she's in this juncture in her life where she escapes into lies and fictions. And what I found remarkable is that her lies are quite bold. They aren't little tiny white lies, but they're like kind of epic. And it seems like she's trying them on sort of in the way that she tries on this dress. So I'd love for you just to say a little bit about that. And if it was scary for you as a writer to have her, because you make a choice as a writer that, okay, she is going to tell this lie. So you have to commit to it as much as she is stepping into it. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about that.
Yes, that was totally scary. So, um, I felt great about so the first chapter, she wanders into the bridal shop and she buys the dress and she gets caught up in the moment in the way that we all might. Okay, it's a little bit extreme, but it's believable. But then you're right, she takes it so much farther, and I was frightened of that as a writer. I felt like, is the reader going to go with this or not? Um, but I also understood that she was in a place where she's not really, kind of accepting her reality or and her circumstances. So, as we mentioned, she's struggling with her mother's failing health, specifically with her mother's worsening dementia. And when one thinks of dementia, of course, and Maya knows this, she's written a lovely memoir about her mother who's struggling with dementia. The person who's struggling from it has, kind of a profound loss of identity, but also the caretaker of the caretakers of the person who's struggling with dementia, or whatever illness. It doesn't obviously just have to be dementia. Um, Suffer sort of a loss of identity of their own, and this was a state that I recognized because I felt this own sort of loss of identity and confusion and disorientation when my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 22, and I lost her about 18 months later. I was one of her main caretakers. My parents were divorced, and I had just graduated from college. I took a job close to home so that I could be there to support her. And of course, I wanted to be there to support her, and I did. I went to the visits, I went to the surgeries, I went to, but it was also quite intense to experience this role reversal where my mother was a very strong person. She was quite complicated in moments, and I grew up, respecting her. And but there were moments when she was ill where she wasn't making good choices, and I had to sort of stand up to her. And I found it incredibly hard to do this because I knew that I had to kind of stand back and be respectful. Um, and then I also just I was trying to be the, I was different than Larissa in a way. Not, maybe I'm being defensive here, right? Because Larissa makes poor choices, but I had this stance of like, I'm going to hold it all together and I'm going to be strong. And I was very non-emotional in it. I was very, because she was quite emotional, and so I was very like, I'm just going to hold this all together. But that really began to manifest itself, and it came out in other ways. And I know from your memoir, Maya, you had this experience as well. But I had sort of physical manifestations where, I sprained my ankle, I pulled out my back, I had bronchitis in the middle of July. It just was, my body was trying to tell me, you need to care for yourself as well. And so to bring it back to Larissa, um, she's just so sort of out of sorts by this. She's not herself. She has lost her identity as a result of her mother's illness. I was driving recently to the North Shore of Boston, and it's a place I know well. And it struck me, they had changed all of the numbers on the exit signs, and these are exit signs that I knew since I was driving, right? So I'm getting off of exit 20A, but now it's exit 40 something, and it struck me as sort of a nice metaphor for that feeling of like, I know this, but I don't know this, and there's something that's like that much slightly off about it that it can be really disorienting. So
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we have our shifting roles between, with our parents, part of what's so hard is that there's no script, and it is
right,
very disorienting. And when you become a parent, there are so many scripts. There are books and blogs and people who tell you what to do, kind of too much. But when you become your parents' caretaker, as I did with my mother when she came to live with me, one of the things I found so hard was just that, yeah, there were there were no milestones for what the journey was going to look like. I didn't know what to expect.
right.
And you kind of don't know how to step into this space. So, yeah, for that reason, I absolutely felt that in Larissa. And I appreciated that she's given the space to express those emotions. I think so often um, caretakers are just sort of automatically deemed as saints,
Right.
right? And I remember
Exactly. Yeah.
you struggle with so many emotions when you're in it, and you often don't have an outlet for those emotions.
Totally.
And in Larissa, I felt like you gave voice to that emotional experience and to all that we grapple with,
Yeah.
dealing with not just dementia, but as you said, chronic illness in a loved one. I always describe dementia as greedy in what it
Yeah.
takes, steals, kind of like a thief.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and the wallpaper that I just showed, in one of the very early scenes in the book, and in fact the scene that I ended up writing in the end, she takes a crowbar to the wallpaper, which is, to try to uncover the source of an apparent leak. And it's a bit of a drastic response because, but it's part of, like, she just has these emotions. And you're right, you're not, when you're sort of assigned the role of being a caretaker for a parent, there's no initiation, right? There's, as you said, there's no milestones. It's not like this, okay, now we've sort of flipped the shift, you're in charge, she's not in charge. And especially with an adult, with a parent, they're adults, they can make their own decisions. And yet when there's illness involved, you feel like, can she make her own decision? Do I have to step in? And is it appropriate for me to step in?
Right.
It's really hard. Yeah.
And there's no definitive moment. It's not like
Right.
there's the equivalent of like a pregnancy test, and then you have like a
Right.
certain number of months to like prepare.
Right.
Like you see.
Exactly. What to expect when. Yeah.
Exactly. You're constantly in this kind of liminal, uncertain place of like, wait, do I, don't I? So that can be very difficult to negotiate. Um, and the moment with the crowbar and the wallpaper, it's exactly what you were just talking about, of like having somatic, in your body stress, and it's going to come out somewhere. So for
Exactly.
me, it was sprained ankles and bronchitis, and for her it was this like attack of the wallpaper.
Exactly.
I was curious about, so we have two characters in the book, Larissa and Jack, who are both in relationships that are struggling. And Larissa with her boyfriend, Jack with his wife, they find themselves in relationships that are no longer satisfying. And there's this kind of disconnect between what they want the relationship to be versus what it actually is. And that space between like hopes and expectations versus reality. I was hoping that you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, right. So Jack is the male character in the book, and he's been the longtime caretaker of the house, Elmhurst. Um, and he was very well acquainted with Larissa's Aunt Ursula. And right, as Maya mentioned, he's struggling in his marriage. He's been married for, I think it's 11 or 12 years. They've got a set of triplet boys who are 11 and wonderful and quippy, and I think they add actually some humor to the book. Um, but they're not feeling it. And Jack has sort of started to seek, solace elsewhere, and he's not proud of it. And his wife, Holly, is sort of trying to bring him back to that moment. And Larissa, similarly, she's broken up with her boyfriend, but he appears during the action of the book, and they sort of try to reconcile. But there's something missing. And so, I wanted to explore those relationships where you feel like, I really love the other person. There's love there, but it doesn't make it work. And both Larissa and Jack are kind of hitting their heads up against these walls of like, let's make it work. I love this person. Let's make it work. Let's make it work. Let's make it work. And it's not working. And so I think there's a line in the book that talks about the love we keep and the love we forsake. And, how do we know um, this love is going to work out and this one is not? And when we're married, we say till death do us part. Does that mean if it's not working, we just stick with it anyway and be sort of the stand-up guy, which Jack tries to do in a certain moment? Or because we're not satisfied and we're missing something, do we take that leap, and do we try to find something that's more fulfilling, knowing that we're forsaking, something that we had. And I think that's something that's somewhat universal. All of us at some time or another have experienced those moments, the sadness that occurs when you realize, I love this person, but it's over, you know?
Well, so as someone who's divorced, I absolutely relate to that situation of having to kind of reckon with, reality versus what you
Yes.
sort of hope something will be. But also there's so much hope and possibility in your book. And also I think in these life choices when we say, you know what, I'm going to go with reality because that means I'm going to bet on myself.
Right.
And, that sort of self-acknowledgement and self-recognition um, is such a powerful place. One thing I have to ask you about, so Robert mentioned in the intro that you are part of a set of triplets, and we have triplets in the book. I thought it was so charming that they're named Alex, Ben, and Charlie,
Yeah.
ABC.
Yeah. I'm glad you
Um,
noticed that. Yep.
so yeah, I mean, they really did add something, and it occurred to me, as I was reading this, at first I didn't know that you are part of triplets, and I thought, I don't know that I've ever seen triplets before in a novel. Um, so I was curious how much your experience um, and your relationship with your siblings, how much that came into the novel.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I'm just going to tell a quick anecdote here. So, I was born 40 some odd years ago, and ultrasound was very primitive. It did exist, but it was quite new. And my parents, literally, until my sister was born, thought that they were having twins. So I was born first, and my brother was born second. And my father literally said, wow, what more could we want? A boy and a girl, one of each. That's great. And the doctor was like, one more baby. So instant family. There were no other children in the family. That was it. And we were quite premature. So we were 2 months premature, and we were named for a while A, B, and C. So I was A, my brother was B, my sister was C. And so I'm so glad you noticed that, because it's true. The names in the book are Alex, Ben, and Charlie, and it is a nod to our moments in the NICU when we were, 3 pounds apiece and kind of fighting. But knock on wood, we're all very healthy and um, you know, doing well.
That's
So
amazing, by the way, because also being 2 months premature then was very different than
yeah,
now.
totally. Yeah. And we each had our own little separate incubators. And, my mother had worked in the medical field. So I think she was quite worried. My dad, I think, was a little bit less aware of how serious it was, but it was serious, definitely. And so, for a month or so, we were still in the hospital. And then we started to come home at different times. But yeah, yeah, pretty serious. Um, and I never thought I would really write about triplets. It's something that's totally central to my identity. My siblings and I are very different. My sister's very extroverted. I am very introverted. I'm less introverted than I used to be, but as a child, especially, I was very introverted, and my brother was kind of somewhere in the middle. But we would each almost have like these prescribed roles within our relationship, and I did draw on that for the triplets in the book. So you know, my sister was like the gregarious one, the extrovert, and we'd almost, send her out as sort of like a pathfinder or people finder, like go out, talk
The
to those people.
ambassador.
Yeah, ambassador, exactly. Go out, chat with those people, see if we like them, report back to us, and then we might kind of get involved as well. And my brother was always quite theatrical and very funny, so he was always sort of the comedian of the group. In the book, Alex is the one who plays that role, and so I did draw on these. So I certainly so let me step back a second and say that I knew that as I start writing the book, I knew that Jack and Holly had some kids, and as I began to realize that one of the themes of the book was identity, and loss of identity, I felt like the triplets would be an interesting way to amplify that theme of identity, because, you know, they're not identical, right? So a lot of people assume, oh, twins, triplets, identical, they're the same. But in this case, they're not. They're fraternal. And there's even a moment in the book where Larissa says, you're Charlie, right? And he says, Ben, right? And he says, we're not identical, you know. And she said, I know, but they're very interconnected, and the way that they operate is kind of as a group. And so it's easy to kind of get them enmeshed with each other. And I wanted to use them to kind of amplify that theme of like, who are we really? You know, there's another moment in the book, a quote in the book where Larissa is thinking of her mother and thinking, you know, our parents are like beacons in our lives, and when one of those beacons, when one of those coordinates ceases to exist for us, then who are we? You know, and for the triplets, they define themselves by each other. For all of us, I think, right? But even more so when it's this, you know, multiple birth situation. So, you know, that was kind of why I included them in the book.
I love that. I love that because, yeah, as we negotiate our identity, as you know, throughout our lives, we have these shifting points on our
Right.
sort of own personal maps of, yeah, our siblings change, our parents change, and we adjust accordingly. Okay, I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. We already have some questions in. The first question, which someone pre-wrote, was what is the best piece of writing advice that you have received that you still use?
Oh, so much advice.
Right, the still use part is, I think, the
That's the key, right?
a lot of advice out there for writers.
Yeah. So I think the best piece of writing that I still use is getting your butt in the chair and being there. And I've talked a lot about this lately because I work a full-time job. I have a 7-year-old daughter. I have stepkids. I have groceries and laundries, and you know, so I am busy. So it is tough during the week. You know, I'd love to have ideally 2 to 3 hours a day where I could write. I don't have that. But I try to at least familiarize myself with my writing on a daily basis. And that, you know, ideally I'd love to write a page, which, you know, could be roughly 300 to 400 words. You know, writers, we often work on word count rather than page, because when a page gets translated to a published book, it's not the same. It's not the same as, you know, 12 point Times New Roman in a Word doc. But it's a brick by brick, bead by bead approach. And if you put yourself in the chair, you open the opportunity. You may have wonderful days writing. You may have days where you're pulling your hair out thinking, I don't even know the next sort of string of words to write. But if you are familiarizing yourself with the writing every day, I promise you it will be on your mind, and you will be at the grocery store, at work, picking up the kids, and you will be mulling over a problem kind of subconsciously, and something will come into your brain where you'll think, um, you know, that's the solution, and that will get you unstuck. And you know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear your answer to this as well. Do you have some advice?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was just going to say, riffing off of what you just said.
Yeah.
So Louise Erdrich, you know, one of my favorite authors, famously had to literally tie herself to her chair. She used
Yeah.
silk scarves to tie herself to her chair because she experienced so much impatience with herself,
Yeah.
and she knew she just had to like stay in the chair. And yeah, for me, I will say one thing about writing, which is that I think of it as a mistress. This is not really answering the question, but it might be helpful for people. So for me, like the busier I am and the less time I have for
Yeah.
writing, that's when it shows up. So like I often think people tell themselves, oh, I don't have time to write
Yep.
a novel or time to write a book. And I wrote What We Carry when I was caring for my mother and my young daughter, and my mom lived in my house. So sometimes I would literally lock myself in the closet or bathroom for like 15 minutes to write.
Right.
So I guess the advice that I have found for myself is to let it be the mistress
I love
instead of
that.
making it a job. Like we have enough other places in life where we have to be, where we feel obligated to things and we have to, but I think it's okay to let writing sort of sneak up on you. And if you give it 20 good minutes, that's better than, 4 hours. That can seem so ideal to have 4 hours, but it might.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. I love that. Mm.
Okay, one related question is, and I was wondering this myself, so thank you to the person who asked it. When you mentioned in the beginning that you have these two previous books, this person is wondering, as am I, do you think you will ever go back to them? Have you looked at them since?
Yeah. So, one of them, I've been going through old boxes in the basement, which let me tell you is a trip. I don't know if I recommend it or not. Like, been some fun moments and surprises, and some like, oh, didn't need to revisit that, journal entry from, you know, um, but one of those boxes, one of those sort of plastic, containers in the basement holds cardboard boxes of my thesis, which was my first novel. And I'm not ready to go back to that one yet. I feel like in my mind I will at some point. Um, the one that so that one not yet, but I guess I'm optimistic. I brought it up from the basement, so that must be telling me something.
It might be like Larissa, going into this house or going into the bridal shop for that matter. I don't know. It could be this kind of stepping into
Yeah, it could be a catalyst, right? Who knows?
going to be some demolition, but then
Yeah, certainly there will be some demolition, but um, but then the other one, so that there was the one that my agent, he looked at it before this one, and he asked for an exclusive, which is good, a 1 week exclusive. So that means they want to read it. They don't want you to send it to any other agent. Um, that one I am actively reworking actually, and it's in a really different new incarnation that's exciting for me, and I feel great about that. And I have another one that's gestating, so I have a lot on my brain. But yes, I am going to go back to at least one of them, maybe two.
So you basically have kind of twins going on at this moment. You have two
Yeah,
novels.
yeah, exactly.
That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah.
By the way, what do you do as your day job? Someone was asking about the relationship
Yeah,
between
yeah. So I work for a biotech company. I am an English major with my honors in creative writing. I don't have any science background at all. So I am one of the few non-scientists who works for the biotech company, and I work in an operations administrative capacity. So when I really started to work on my last novel, not this one that got published, but the one before, I was working in a creative job. It was a cool job. I worked at the Boston Design Center in a furniture showroom, working with lighting and furniture, and a lot of it was custom made. And I was fascinated by that. Similar to me loving old houses, I love watching how things are made out of wood and metal, and I love sort of thinking of the tangible nature of it. Um, but it was filled with really creative but sometimes dramatic personalities, and I felt like I sometimes really brought that home with me. So I transitioned to first working for a venture capital firm, um, where it just was much more sort of practical. I have this very organized, logistically oriented side of my brain, and it tapped into that. So then I found that when I went home, I had more creative energy to kind of free myself up for focusing on my creative life. And so um, the biotech job has allowed me to do that. And it's got, biotech in Boston is big, and frankly, it pays well for the type of position in the industry. It pays well. So
Yeah, so many writers throughout, history have had day jobs that are very different.
yeah, I
William,
think that's so cool.
yeah, William Carlos Williams was a doctor, like many
Yeah,
other. So I find that really fascinating when there's this like doing one thing during the day that involves a very different part of your brain.
exactly.
And then maybe it helps create that kind of like mistress feeling where writing is such an escape and it's so different that it's like a completely different room in the house.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it feels like. Exactly. You're opening up a different room. Like, oh. okay, now I'm in this venue.
How have the people at your job reacted to your novel? Did they know that you were writing?
They do, yeah. So they're great. They're so supportive. My CEO is wonderfully supportive. He asks about it a lot. They, sometimes it's challenging as a writer because this book took 4.5 to 5 years, which is actually kind of fast in a way. Like when you have a full-time job and kids and other things, right? It could take much longer, and so sometimes it's hard when people say, "How's the novel going?" How because you feel like, oh, I should be much farther along than I am, but it takes time. But they've been hugely supportive. I mean, we have a great team. One of the things about, I did want to say that COVID, it's been hard living in this pandemic. It's been hard for all of us. Um, but I feel so lucky to have my home, my health, my family, and my job. They're hugely supportive. They offer great flexibility, and it's been wonderful. And so not only my CEO, but many of the employees, my colleagues who work there as well. And we have these weekly meetings, and they, encourage me to talk about the book and ask how it's going. And they've been wonderful, really wonderful.
That's great. In the same way that I found caretaking to, for all of its difficulties, to illuminate these sort of wells of gratitude that things, for things that I had taken for granted before. I think this period of the pandemic, we've all become more appreciative and have
Yeah.
found the things that, yes, we should be so appreciative and grateful for this. So that's lovely.
And there's been so many silver linings, right? Like, I don't miss commuting. I didn't have a horrific commute, but still, I don't have to kind of race out of the house at the same time that I'm trying to get my child out of the house and lunch for her and all of that. And I eat lunch with my husband and my daughter and my stepkids way more often than I did before. We also live in this lovely neighborhood. It's very, very walkable. My neighbors are great. So there are these silver linings. And also I feel like we're operating on a little bit of a slower pace, and it feels like, wow, I mean, about time, right? For
Yeah.
all of us, we've all been operating at capacity for a while.
Yes. I remember once while on vacation, my daughter noticed that she could only see the rainbow that was in the sky when she had sunglasses on.
Oh, neat.
And so
Interesting.
that's one way I think about this
Oh,
time
what a great
period.
metaphor. Yeah.
Lenses, but you see new things and you see differently.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Um, we have a question about who are your favorite authors. I think this is such a hard question
This is
because
such a hard question.
yeah,
Yeah.
trying to choose between children, for favorites, but
Right.
maybe share a few. They don't have to be.
Yeah, so right. So uh, writers like Ann Patchett and Ann Tyler. I love writers that sort of have sort of quirky characters to them. Tom Perrotta, Richard Russo, Audrey Niffenegger. Um, yeah, gosh, it is such a hard question. I also really love the classics, so I love a good Dickens. I love the Brontes. Um, who else comes to mind? Did I mention Andrew Sean Greer is a really cool writer? But it is so hard to choose a favorite. I've been reading recently. Mary Beth Keane wrote a book that touches on mental illness called Ask Again, Yes, which I loved. Um, there's so many amazing writers out there. Um, Colson Whitehead, uh, you know, many, many.
Well, that's a great list. Um, and one interesting question, I would not have thought to ask this. Do your siblings write also?
They don't. My brother was also an English major, and he worked for many years in the news business. So he was the assignment editor for the 11 o'clock news for Channel 4 here in Boston, and he also worked at Channel 9 in New Hampshire for a little while. But he doesn't do that now. So he actually has great writing skills, but I think of him as more of sort of a essay or sort of a strong letter writer. So and my sisters also has great writing skills, but she doesn't tend to employ them as much. She's more of a visual artist. So she was an art history major, and she is now an interior designer. I mean, she's doing great. She lives in Bellingham, Washington, which is up in the Seattle north of Seattle, and her interior design business is going great guns. And I'm continually impressed with what she can do, because I don't feel like I have those skills.
And yet your novel is filled with such luxurious
That's
detail.
true. Yeah,
I thought,
yeah.
oh, it makes so much
There's
sense that your sister is an interior designer, because I could picture Elmhurst and almost smell it, like a,
yeah,
the
yeah.
atmosphere and the details were so there.
Yeah, and Elmhurst is really like a character in the book. The house
Yeah.
is certainly a character in the book. I think people will get a sense of that for sure.
Yeah. Often in books, in novels, like the city or the setting will kind of figure as a character, but here it was really like the house um, itself. So I found that fascinating. What was scarier for you, sharing the novel with the world at large or with your immediate family?
I mean, both for different moments, right? Sharing it with my father and my stepmother, who are wonderful supports. But, there's some intimate scenes in there, and that's that's hard and scary. Um, it's almost in some ways hardest to share it with your friends, I think. And I almost mean friends who are not writers. I have I grew up in the area, and I still have many, like for instance, high school friends or high school teachers, and of course I want them to enjoy the novel, but I'm also realistic that not every novel is for every person. So I even try to say that to them, like, you can be supportive of me without necessarily being drawn to the novel. And I'm not trying to diss my own work because I put lots of time and effort for it. But it's true that not every book is for every person. Um, Sharing it with the world is a different thing. I think I wasn't so scared to share it with the world once we had gone through copy edits, and we had the cover, we had it kind of in motion. What's, I think, almost scarier is thinking to yourself, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I look at every word carefully. I choose everything carefully, and knowing that this is the last time at which you can make a change, knowing there's a permanence to it now, that's different than when you have the novel and you're working on your own. Once it's in book form and it's out in the world, it becomes not just mine but the world's as well, and that's exciting. But I can't now change it. It now is what it is, right?
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. And I will tell you a little confession on my part, which is that whenever I do readings and I read an excerpt from my book, I use the galley, which is the pre-publication version. And I do that specifically so that when I see things that I don't like, I can tell myself that, oh, in the finished novel. So that's my own act of self-delusion.
Yeah, totally.
We're coming up on 8 o'clock here. I want to give people one last minute in case they have like pressing questions. And I also want to remind people to go to Wellesley Books, their website, where they can purchase not just your novel, but autographed copies of your novel. How lovely is that?
That's right. And then also, don't forget about Maya's book here, which she has the paperback version that's on behind her there, that's going to be released, I think, in April. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely check this out. I highly recommend.
Oh, thank you.
And I wanted to mention too. I know maybe they just give people a few more seconds. Though both of these books cover some challenging topics, I think ultimately they're both really hopeful, and that I think with both of them, the message is that we can sort of find ourselves and find redemption when we face our vulnerabilities and connect with people we love. And it may be connecting in ways that are surprising or unpredictable, but just as fulfilling. So just I wanted to kind of leave you all with that one last thought.
I love that. I always sort of think to myself, like when, you find a pearl it's such a gorgeous, luminous thing. But if you think about the oyster, it would never have chosen the grain of sand. And it's uncomfortable and unsettling when you have that grain of sand and you're negotiating and grappling with it. But you don't get to the pearl without that difficult process.
Exactly.
Okay, there is one last question that
Okay.
I don't want to leave unasked, and it is about the title of your novel, and specifically why the French reference.
So when I was growing up, living near Beverly Farms, my grandmother, as I mentioned, lived there for many years. And on this small little main street, there was a shop called French Bridals. And in the early renditions of this book, the shop was called French Bridals, kind of in homage. The shop is no longer there, but I think I like shopped for my junior prom dress there or something, you know. So it was kind of in the visual memory of my brain as I was depicting this small town. And I did have a different title for the book at the start, but my editor renamed the shop the Little French Bridal Shop and felt that that would be a good launching off, because the first scene takes place in the bridal shop and kind of it's the inciting incidents, and it's the incident rather, and it's the moment from which kind of all the action springs. So that's where the title came from.
For whatever it's worth, What We Carry was originally called something completely different. It was called The Woman in the River. And
I know why.
So Random House realized there were a bunch of books coming out in a row that all had that kind of formula. It was like the female figure at or in place. It was like the girl on the train, the woman in the window.
Right.
So yeah, so it's interesting also how titles come to be.
That's a whole other discussion, because there's the writing of the book and the publishing of the book, but then the marketing of the book, and the title and the cover really ties in very heavily to the marketing. So, that's a whole other discussion we could have if we had more time.
Well, thank you for everything that you have shared with us, for your beautiful, moving, poignant novel, and also just for talking so openly and in such a beautiful, eloquent way about the book, and for showing us what led to it. And I also want to thank again our hosts for the evening and for this network of libraries, and to everyone for being here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Megan. And we'll end the call in about 5 seconds here. Thank you, everyone, and everyone have a wonderful evening.
And thank you so much to Maya as well.
Yeah, wonderful job, Maya. Wonderful job, Jennifer.